It's time to work on this front piece here. So what we did was we put the fender back on, and then we wanted to make sure that we got a consistent gap from the top down to the bottom there. And we're gonna do that with 2 bolts. We've got one back in there, and that's gonna set it in and out sideways to where we want it. And then on the top here, we got one right there, and that's gonna set basically this corner. So this bolt here will set this corner area, and then as we move down and we kind of line this all up, that other bolt's going to be in here somewhere, and that's going to set the in and out of where it lines up here. It's being held right there, which is good, but then from here down, and we've trimmed this, it's just kind of hanging in no man's land. So what we did was we threw some tape on there to kind of protect the paint a little bit so it doesn't get all scratched up too bad. We put our magnets on, and then that's going to hold it so it lines up with the door. Once we've done that, then I took this stub here, and then I'd only tacked up to there, but we left this and moved that in to line up with the bottom of the fender, and then I got my one big tack there, and we're gonna leave that like that for a minute. And then what we're gonna do is we have this piece here. So we see the gap in there, and that is for the 2 transition pieces that we're gonna put in here. Here's our spot in here where that's gonna end up going. So I've just roughly set it in there so you can see how this is gonna be, and there's gonna be a bit of an angle here. And the reason for that is it's gonna be easier for us to get our tools in and remove those 2 bolts. So this top piece is going to be welded to the fender, and then the bottom piece is going to weld to the frame and then to our 90-degree metal down here. Once we've put that piece in there, this is going to then hold this in place so it's not going to move. And then as you can see, that's pretty tight in there, same problem we had before. So we'll get in there with the grinder, we're going to get our gap that we need so we can weld that properly. Threw some weld on the bottom there on the outside. And then on the inside here, we got some tacks in place holding both this plate here to the frame, and then on the inside of this one. And you'll notice again, we've got an angle going on here, and that is so we can get our tools in easily to remove these 2 bolts that are going to fasten the bottom of the fender down. We have the fender removed, and now we can get in here and we can seam weld this along here, and then on the back side on the bottom there. And then we got to get our grinder, our zippy disc, we got to create a gap in here, and then we can weld this as well. Got it all seam welded in here on the top only so far. We probably don't need any more than that. I mean, the tacks on the bottom are fine, but don't need to weld it on the bottom. What I'm inclined to do is I started back there welding, kind of contouring the shape underneath the door there. And what I'm thinking I'll do is I'll just remove the driver door, and I'll just continue from there to here. And once I've done that, then I can throw the doors back on, and this section is all done. We put the fender back on so we can get our angle or our contour here, and we cut the end of the metal that was hanging off the end on this side. We also did the back as well. We cut that off, found what angle we wanted there, and just sliced that off. And then we finished welding all the way along the sides here, and we just kind of ground it down. It'll probably need some finish work a little bit later, but this is good for now. So it's all welded, seam welded, and ground down in here. On the inside here, you want to make sure that you got enough clearance up against here after we've welded it, so that this thing can shift if it has to. And you'll just drill out your holes on this plate here to give yourself some clearance. So we'll take these 2 bolts out, and then we'll show you the finished piece in here. After we removed that fender, this is what it looks like here. And what we did was we ended up putting a little piece of metal in here to seal this all up as well. Admittedly, after the fact, I should have had the fender on here before I did that, because this could have been brought over just a little bit more to give some more clearance, but it does fit and work. And these are the 2 holes here. You can drill those out a little larger, and then that's going to give you some play for when you want to set your fender, so that this edge here will match to the fender. And as well, when you're doing your gap here for the door, you could drill them out larger and then get some play in there. When we take a look at this plate that we've used for the back side there, we're going to do the same design on the front. And here's what our plate for the front looks like. And what I had to do is I had to put a slice in here. So I cut it this way and I cut it this way in order to bend that piece of metal to match the profile of the floor. But other than that, we've got the backside painted again, because we'll get at that after the fact with our high heat paint. Our plate is designed to go in like this, and then you can see where this is going to match that. So this portion of the floor begins, it's flat, and then it begins to curve up like this. And then I finally made a decision to, because we've got some blow through spots here and it's rusted and we've got some holes and this metal is thin and weak. So I finally decided to replace it. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get a piece of metal and I'm gonna replace this piece in here, and I made it wide enough that it's also gonna accommodate our two plates that are gonna go across like this. So we're gonna make that piece of metal and then I'm gonna weld that into the floor. What I did was I measured out that piece of metal, and what we got is we probably got about 8 inches this way, and then we got 5 wide. So that's going to be our flat piece of metal that goes in there. Also, this is that jig that I made up there when we were going to make this flat and true on the bottom of the floor there. So what I did was I bolted it on here as well. I put our holes in there, bolted this on, and this is going to basically support this flat piece of metal. And then I just got the torch there, give it a little heat where I want to bend it, and then I give it a few bashes with the soft hammer there to get the start of a profile. Now we'll take that off, fit it in place, and with these holes in here, we can actually still bolt that to the floor as we're measuring and figuring out what we need to do to shape the metal to get it into place. Here's that plate we got on there, and what we did was we drilled all of our holes. Everything's lined up and consistent and true. And then so what we're going off of is we're going off this profile right in here, and you can see the difference from there to here, right where we've got our space. So not only is that metal going this way, it's also coming from there, it's coming up this way as well. So this is where we're going to be. As we could see, it's pretty much touching the metal all the way across here, and again on this side, and then it's just right in here where right this spot here is where things change. So it's touching there, it's touching there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bolt it in, line it up, and then I'm going to start cutting from, I'm going to leave that lip right there because that's part of the frame. Cut from here out here and then back again, and then once we've removed that metal, then we can go on the inside and remove the top portion. So when we put this plate in, then it'll be welded in up at the top, and it'll also be welded in onto our lip of our frame metal here. I'm just going to use the small cutter right there to try and get in and cut everything as much as I can with that, and hopefully that'll reach it all. Once we have it all cut out, then we'll mark it, make some reference marks as well, and we'll set it in place, and then we'll start tacking it in there. There's the old piece of metal and there's the new piece of metal. But we got a couple things going on here, because when we took our new piece of metal and we lined it up, it was over top of the existing lip of the kind of frame support metal. So we had it on the outside of this, it was over top of this piece of metal, and when we did that and we lined up our holes and drilled them, so now when we put the metal on the inside here, those holes didn't line up. So I had to choose a hole to keep, and what I did with the other one was I just welded it in, so it's in here. I welded it in and then I ground it flat, and then what we'll do is we're going to set that piece of metal in there, and then we're going to re-drill that hole out. So we've got our one bolt in here holding that in place, and then what we'll do is to drill our other one. What I have is a small bolt. This is a 1/4 inch bolt that'll thread into our nut that we have tack welded on there, and then we've just got a hole in there, and then we've got the drill bit to match, so that'll be threaded in, and this will be our guide, and then we'll drill our pilot hole, and then we can step drill it up to our 1/4 inch, what we want to bolt that in there. So again, we're just going to screw that in place. That's our guide, and then we're going to drill that pilot hole in. Once we have this positioned where we want it, and also too, once we have this kind of bolted in place, we can get in here and we can get our consistent gap. Looks like we might have to remove a little more material in this corner, both this side and this side. We got lots of gap in here, so when we do our welding, we'll hit that metal in the bottom there, as well as these two. And in here, it looks like we might have to freshen up our gap in here as well. Down here, we got the jig that I made for this project. We've used it quite a few times. It's come in handy. This bolted on here is going to secure that, and it also too has become our straight edge so that we get our 90 degree from here to here. What I would do is I would put the square in there and I would get that edge trued up, and then I tighten down the bolts. I've got this one tight and these ones just snug. And so now we can put some tack welds in here. Also too, before we weld it, we want to drill our hole through to the right size. We've got our pilot hole in there, and then we'll just drill that out to the right size before we get too carried away, and then we can reinstall this with those two bolts and then start tack welding it in place. So here's a closer look of where that hole ended up. So this is where we filled in our previous hole, and there's where our pilot hole is. So that's kind of how far it was out. We're tacking this patch, and ordinarily what you would do is you would fit it and then you'd kind of tack it all the way around and then follow it up with seam welding. But in this case, because of the contours of the metal and its location, I'm not doing that. I'm kind of picking a starting point here, which was kind of over here and here. This corner basically is my starting point. And so what I'm doing is I'm welding, and I'm putting enough weld in there that I can manipulate the metal. So this is where those grooves are, and then we've got to massage the metal up so then it's basically flush and matches the other part there. In this case, this metal is down below here. So what I'll do is I'll get underneath there with my blunt chisel and my hammer here, and then I'm just going to tap this edge until I got it lined up with there, and then I'll give it a tack, and I'll give it a few more tacks so I got enough weld so that when I continue on with the hammer and chisel, I'm not going to break the tacks that I have. So I started off where it was already kind of matched in place, and then I kind of tack it, and then I put some bead in there. Also too, you gotta use the air, cool it down, because this metal here is pretty thin, and if you don't, it's going to burn through and it's going to cause some troubles. And we've cut it back. We do got good metal here, but it's still thin and it'll burn through. So you just got to take your time and work it along. So I'm going to continue on with this side here. I'm going to do this whole side here, and then I've got it up to right there, because this here is another, that's going to be the next stage. I'll probably likely do the same thing here. I'll fill in our gap here, up, same thing, up to this crease. And then I'm going to take our support that we have bolted on the bottom, and then I'm going to move it over here. And then that support's going to keep this true. We're going to match this metal to this metal here. And then we'll do the same thing. We're going to finish it up here, here, and here. Now we're on the second stage here of this patch, and like I said, we just welded up to this seam here on both sides, and then we've got it all down here. And so now here we've got quite a bit of a gap in there. That's a little bit more than what we want, but fear not, what we'll just do is we'll just put some scrap metal in there while we're tacking it together. This is just going to fill the gap while we're tacking it. We're going to start in here. We've got our little clamp in here to kind of get these as close to possible as we can. Gonna start tacking in here, and then we'll work our way along this way. Why? Because this is the side that's basically more square and true, and this, the floor starts to kind of shift over here. So this is where we're gonna have to kind of like massage the metal to fit our shape here. We want this to fit this because this whole patch here, the reason we put that in there is to keep everything true and square for our receiver piece. So that's why we have to manipulate this metal to match this metal here. We continue to weld this patch in here, and what I was talking about earlier with this gap, it's too big, so we got some scrap metal here and we're going to fill that gap. If you can see on the other side, you see that there's a gap there, and there's also a gap on this side. So I basically kind of held that here and I tacked both ends, and now what I'll do is I'll push this down so it's kind of equal in between both sides. I'll just tack here, tack there, tack here, tack there. Once it's in place, then I can continue to seam weld it along, and that's kind of what I was doing over here where the gap was big. Now over here we had this metal here where that frame structure is to about there, so that wasn't a problem. But then from there on we had that gap that we had to fill, so that's how I've been putting the filler metal in and tacking it in. And there's going to be some extra grinding after the fact, but this is, I think, an acceptable way of doing it, because if you try to fill this gap in with no filler metal, I think you're going to cause yourself a lot of frustration. We got that top all welded in there, and where we had too much gap up at the top here, now we don't have enough gap right in here, so we're just going to open that up with the zippy disc. We're going to finish welding our last little bit here, and then as well over here. So I've welded alongside the plate, but what we'll do is we'll put some filler weld in here to fill all this in, and then even that all out as well. We finished seam welding everything here, and I think we've got all of it. You don't have to break down the weld if you don't want to, but you can smooth out the high spots. This is all going to get covered up anyway with the carpet and the cushion or whatever that's underneath the carpet. That's why also too, I'm not too worried about these nuts here, because I think that the cushion underneath the carpet will adjust for that. And your feet are just down here anyway, so it's not like you're going to be kneeling on it or anything, so I think that'll just be fine. We also came in here on the underside and we seam welded everything here, only because we can reach it and got access at it. Now down here, what I'll do is I'll likely knock down some of the high spots where I need to, because we have to put our plates in here. So we're going to put a plate here, we're going to put another plate in here, and weld that to the body like we did on the back, and then those are going to be like our plates for where our receiver will bolt or line up and bolt into. Before we do that though, what I want to do is in here where we're going to have that plate, I'll probably just kind of scratch this up, clean it up, and throw some high heat paint in here, because that plate, when we put that on, it'll be covering this portion. So we want to protect the metal so no moisture gets in behind there and starts rusting up all this fresh clean steel. And just as an example here, these brackets I built when I made this front bumper, I didn't paint these, and so this is an example of what it's going to look like if you don't paint it. It rusts up pretty fast and hard. So I'm going to remove these, probably clean them up, sandblast them, paint them, put them back on. And also in here where we had some exposed metal, you can see everything that's exposed. It doesn't take long to rust. This thing was just sitting in the backyard for the most of the time before I could get back at it. So it doesn't take long for this stuff to rust, and who wants to go through all this work and time and effort only to have it deteriorate so quickly. After we welded that patch in there with those captive nuts, things got shifted around. So what we're doing is we're fitting everything on the bottom. You always want to fit everything first before you commit to welding. I've learned that lesson many times. What I've done is I fit this in place, and I found out that things had shifted, and so I don't know if you can tell there's my little dimple. So that is where the new hole has to be. I cut off the captive nut that was on the other side there. We're gonna have to weld this up, and then we've got to re-drill our hole where that little pin punch is right there. It's very close to where we are already. So what I did was I took a stainless steel washer here, and I've got that clamped to the bottom. It's a dissimilar metal. The weld shouldn't hold to it, and then that way I can fill this in and then re-drill my hole right there. Here it is after we've put some weld in there, filled that hole up. And thereafter we got it all cleaned up, but we can still see our little dimple there where we got to drill our new hole. Here's the washer on the back side. We're just going to hold that. We're going to get under there with our chisel. Should pop that right off there because this is stainless steel and we're welding steel. It shouldn't have, the weld should not have adhered to the stainless. Here it is knocked off there, and we had to hit it a little bit to get it off there. But if you rub this with your thumb, that is pretty much, if you see there, the washer has maintained its profile. So the weld has not adhered to that to stay fixed in place. So a little trick, when you can do that, use a dissimilar metal to get in behind there, but it doesn't work all the time because you need to clamp it to the work, and in a lot of cases that's just not practical. Here's that new location. We got it drilled out, and then we tacked our nut on there. So what we're going to do is we're going to clean that up, splash a little more of that high heat paint just where we did some work there. Just protect the metal, don't rust. And then we'll refit this into place, and then we'll start welding our, basically what I'm calling our base plates for the receiver assembly. The last thing you want to do is you want to chase those threads with a tap. Better to do it now than it's in an awkward, hard to get spot. It should go on hand tight. If it's not going on with your fingers, then you should be chasing the threads and making it so it will. So we've got everything all set up here, and I got some shims under there because there's some clearance between, this is a high spot and down at the end is a high spot. So we're just going to fill that in when we weld it, but as we bolt it all up, we want it to be straight and true, so we got some shims in there holding that together. We have our plate that we were just working with there fit in here, so this bolt and this bolt both line up and everything's good that way. And we've just got this kind of put in place here solely to line up this bolt on this plate. But we've got that plate in there, line up all them holes, line up that. But we're going to be working on this side here with our 1-inch square tubing support to make sure everything's straight and true. We take a look from this angle. This is where we're going to see that gap where those our shims are right there. So we've got that gap. It's not anything extreme, but we'll fill that in with some weld, and then we're just going to tack this plate in here where that is. We're going to tack it where we can. We finished doing all the welding under here, and we've got like our base pads, and then I've bolted our flat bar on there. And so now we will start constructing the receiver. This is our space in between, and then here's our receiver here, and that's just going to go in there. And here's the front with its rough location in there. What we'll do is we'll set this in place however we need to do that, and then what we'll do is we'll end up putting our outside 2x4 here as well to finish constructing that receiver piece. And once that's complete, then we can weld these stubs to the rocker slider and then just cap the ends on the end there.